What I do, I love so much. I've always wanted to be an actress, so I'm doing what I love the most.
Major Houlihan.
Sir.
Chief nurse.
Yes, sir.
10 years, spotless record.
Thank you, sir.
They made us laugh, they made us cry, and together they turned MASH into one of the greatest shows in television history. Yet behind the scene, cracks began to show. Why did some of the most beloved stars suddenly walk away from a show at the height of its success? The real reasons may shock you. Birth of a television phenomenon. The story of MASH did not begin on television. Its roots go back to a book written in 1968 by Dr. H. Richard Hornberger, who used the pen name Richard Hooker. He had served as a surgeon in a mobile Army surgical hospital during the Korean War, and used his experiences to write MASH, a novel about 3 Army doctors. The novel blended dark humor with the grim reality of wartime medicine and quickly became a success. 2 years later, director Robert Altman adapted the book into a film. The 1970 movie MASH was sharp, satirical, and deeply anti-war, reflecting the growing disillusionment of the Vietnam era. Its success made it clear that this story had the power to connect with audiences far beyond the printed page. In 1972, CBS decided to take a chance on a television adaptation. Few could have guessed that this show, launched quietly in September, would run for 11 seasons and become one of the most iconic programs in American television history. What set MASH apart was its style. It was not a simple comedy. It combined humor, drama, and sharp social commentary. One moment, viewers were laughing at a prank in the operating room, and the next, they were facing the heartbreak of a soldier's injury. This blending of tones was new to television and made the show feel more real. The series also changed how sitcoms looked and sounded. Traditional sitcoms relied on laugh tracks, but MASH often avoided them, letting silence or the sound of helicopters fill the air. Instead of feeling staged, the show gave audiences the sense of being in a real camp. The mix of authentic military detail with character-driven stories created a world that felt both human and raw. Yet success did not come instantly. The first season struggled in the ratings, and CBS even considered canceling the show. But the network took a risk and moved it to a new time slot. Slowly, viewers began to connect with its offbeat humor and heartfelt moments. By focusing on the relationships between characters and not just quick jokes, the show gained loyal fans. The cast included Alan Alda as Hawkeye, Wayne Rogers as Trapper, Loretta Swit as Major Houlihan, McLean Stevenson as Henry Blake, Larry Linville as Frank Burns, and Gary Berghoff as Radar. Together, they formed the heart of the 4077th. Audiences laughed with them, cried with them, and saw their own struggles reflected in the chaos of war. Over time, MASH became more than entertainment. It was a cultural touchstone. Its finale in 1983 was watched by over 100 million people, setting a record that stood for decades. While the show was winning hearts on screen, trouble was brewing off camera. Tensions began to rise, and the stability of the cast was shaken. One by one, key actors decided to walk away at the height of the show's success. It all began with one man's ambition, sparking the first major shift in MASH history. Let's tell you the surprising reason why he left. McLean Stevenson. McLean Stevenson became a household name when he stepped into the role of Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake on MASH. Henry was the kind of commanding officer who often looked a little lost, shuffling through papers or fumbling with orders. Yet his heart was always in the right place. He was not the sharpest military mind, but he cared deeply for the men and women under his command. His warmth, awkward humor, and sometimes bumbling nature gave audiences a character who felt real. Behind the scenes, however, Stevenson was wrestling with disappointment. As Alan Alda's Hawkeye grew into the center of the show, Stevenson felt left behind. Loretta Swit, who played Major Houlihan, later explained that Stevenson often said he wanted to be more than just part of an ensemble. He longed to be the main figure, the star who carried the series. He even admitted, "I know I will not be in anything as good as this show, but I have to leave and be number one." That mix of ambition and frustration slowly pushed him toward the exit. Other challenges also played a part in his decision. Filming was not always glamorous. The cast and crew often dealt with poor working conditions on set, with long days and little comfort. Stevenson grew weary of the grind, and combined with his desire for greater recognition, he made up his mind to move on. His departure came in one of the most memorable episodes in television history. In the Season 3 finale, Abyssinia Henry, Colonel Blake receives his long-awaited discharge papers. The camp throws him a cheerful farewell, filled with hugs, smiles, and promises of a brighter future back home. But in the final moments, Radar walks into the operating room and quietly tells the doctors that Henry's plane was shot down. There were no survivors. The room falls silent. The nation fell silent too. The shock was immediate. CBS received thousands of letters, some praising the bold honesty, others furious that a beloved character had been taken away. A planned going-away party scene was even cut because the mood was too somber. Stevenson left to chase bigger dreams, but he later admitted that leaving MASH was a mistake he never truly recovered from. Henry Blake's exit rocked the show. The departure immediately following shifted dynamics even more, but without such a heartfelt farewell. Wayne Rogers. The first years of MASH carried much of their charm through the bond between two surgeons who seemed inseparable. Hawkeye Pierce and Trapper John McIntyre balanced each other perfectly. They were quick with a joke, fearless in defying authority, and relied on one another in the chaos of war. Their chemistry gave the show a rhythm that fans immediately connected with, and Trapper was never just background. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Hawkeye, both in comedy and in conflict, creating one of television's most memorable partnerships. As time went on, however, the spotlight began to shift. Hawkeye's character grew more complex, with deeper emotional storylines and moral debates, while Trapper was often left to react rather than lead. What had started as an equal partnership was slowly becoming uneven. Behind the camera, Wayne Rogers, who brought Trapper to life, began to feel frustrated. He believed the balance had tipped too far toward Hawkeye as the central figure. To Rogers, Trapper was no longer given the space to grow or change, and that left him feeling overshadowed. Rogers had a unique situation compared to many of his co-stars. He had never signed a long-term contract with the producers. Instead, he worked on a simple handshake deal. That gave him the freedom to walk away without being bound by legal ties. By the end of Season 3, he quietly chose not to return. Unlike McLean Stevenson's Henry Blake, who was given a powerful farewell episode, Trapper John disappeared between seasons. When the next season opened, the character was already gone, with only a brief explanation that he had been discharged. Fans were stunned. To lose Henry Blake and Trapper John almost back-to-back was a heavy blow. Viewers who had loved the duo's antics were left with no closure, no final scene to say goodbye. Yet, the change forced the writers to reimagine the series. Into Trapper's place came B.J. Honeycutt, a new partner for Hawkeye, who brought a gentler, more reflective tone. This shift helped the show evolve beyond the prank-filled energy of its early years, moving into deeper storytelling that dealt with the costs of war in more mature ways. But disappearing without closure was not the hardest way to go. Some actors stayed longer, only to leave when the emotional weight of the show became too heavy. Let's tell you about another emotional departure. Gary Berghoff. Walter Radar O'Reilly was more than just a clerk on MASH. He was the heart of the 4077th. With his wide eyes, nervous smile, and uncanny ability to hear helicopters before anyone else, Radar brought an innocence that softened the harshness of war. While other characters broke rules or hid behind humor, Radar reminded viewers of the humanity still alive in a place filled with suffering. He was also the only actor to carry his role over from the 1970 film into the television series, and he transformed Radar from a mischievous young soldier into a symbol of purity and hope. For 7 seasons, Gary Berghoff's performance anchored many of the show's most tender moments. Yet behind his gentle screen presence, the actor himself was struggling. By the late 1970s, Berghoff was exhausted. The long filming days left him drained, and he began to suffer from burnout. He also battled anxiety, particularly a fear of being late to set because of his ongoing sleep problems. These issues weighed heavily on him and made the demands of a hit series difficult to bear. More importantly, he felt he was missing out on being a father. With a young daughter at home, Berghoff often said he regretted not being present for her early years. His desire to spend more time with his family grew stronger than his commitment to the show. When he finally decided to leave, the producers gave Radar a farewell worthy of his importance. The goodbye came in a 2-part storyline titled Goodbye, Radar. In these episodes, Radar briefly returns from leave to find the camp falling apart in his absence. At first, he tries to fix everything, just as he always had, but in the end, he realizes it is time to go home and take care of his family farm. The final scene shows him walking away from camp, leaving his teddy bear behind on Hawkeye's bunk. Originally, Berghoff wanted to perform the farewell scene with dramatic sobs, but the director suggested he hold back. The more restrained version was used, and it became one of the most powerful moments in the series. After leaving MASH, Berghoff kept a lower profile. He made guest appearances on television, appeared on game shows, and even tried a spin-off called Walter, though it never took off. Eventually, he devoted more time to painting, wildlife conservation, and inventing. Though he stepped out of the spotlight, fans never forgot the innocence and warmth he gave to Radar. Radar's exit left a huge void, but as one beloved character stepped away, another would soon arrive to give the show a sharper, more dramatic edge. Larry Linville. Major Frank Burns was one of the most unforgettable characters in the early years of MASH. Played by Larry Linville, Frank was the perfect mix of arrogance and insecurity. He followed the rules to the letter, often more concerned with pleasing his superiors than caring for his patients. His affair with Major Houlihan and his constant clashes with Hawkeye and Trapper made him both ridiculous and irritating. Frank was the character audiences loved to hate. He was narrow-minded, jealous, and pompous, but Linville brought such commitment to the role that Frank became essential to the comedy and tension of the show. As the series matured, though, Frank's role began to feel stuck. While other characters grew deeper and revealed new sides of themselves, Frank remained the same self-important foil. For Linville, this lack of growth was frustrating. He later explained that he felt his character had run out of room to develop. More than that, he became weary of being recognized only as the guy you loved to loathe. Fans disliked Frank so much that Linville himself felt the weight of that reputation. After 5 seasons, he decided it was time to move on. In his own words, "By then, my involvement with Major Frank Burns had run its course." It was time to move on. Frank's departure at the end of Season 5 was very different from the emotional send-offs given to other cast members. There was no dramatic farewell scene, no last storyline to close his arc. When Season 6 began, Frank was simply gone. Off-screen, it was explained that he had been promoted and sent stateside, leaving the 4077th behind. For some fans, it was an abrupt end to a character who had been such a constant presence in the camp. Yet, the exit opened the door to one of the most important shifts in the show's history. In Frank's place came Major Charles Emerson Winchester III, played by David Ogden Stiers. Unlike Burns, Winchester was cultured, highly skilled, and deeply complex. He could still be pompous, but he was no fool, and his clashes with Hawkeye and BJ brought more nuanced drama. This change allowed the show to move beyond slapstick antagonism and into stories with greater emotional and moral weight. Linville may have left because Frank had no more to give, but in doing so, he gave MASH room to grow. His departure helped the series evolve from simple comedy into something far richer. With Burns gone, Winchester's entrance made the show smarter, but maintaining that balance behind the scenes was not always easy. David Ogden Stiers. When Major Charles Emerson Winchester III first appeared in the Season 6 opener, Fade Out, Fade In, audiences knew immediately that MASH was taking a new direction. Coming from Boston with an aristocratic background, Winchester was Harvard-trained, highly skilled, and deeply proud of his intellect. Unlike his predecessor Frank Burns, who was often incompetent and petty, Winchester posed a very different kind of challenge. He was pompous and arrogant, but he was also a brilliant surgeon, which meant he could stand toe-to-toe with Hawkeye and BJ in both skill and wit. His presence brought fresh energy to the series, pushing the storylines beyond simple comic relief. The man behind Winchester, David Ogden Stiers, was perfectly suited for the role. A Juilliard-trained actor with a strong stage background, Stiers brought depth and dignity to his performance. He avoided making Winchester one-dimensional, choosing instead to show subtle cracks beneath the character's polished surface. Audiences could see both the pride and the insecurity of a man raised with privilege, trying to hold on to his identity in the middle of a brutal war. Stiers's performance was so strong that he earned 2 Emmy nominations for his work on the series, and critics praised the way he reshaped the tone of the show. Winchester's addition allowed the writers to tell new kinds of stories. Unlike Burns, who was easy to dismiss as a fool, Winchester demanded respect even when he was insufferable. His clashes with Hawkeye and BJT were not just about right and wrong in the operating room, but also about class, reputation, and personal values. This gave the show richer conflicts and allowed for episodes that explored moral dilemmas with greater nuance. At times, Winchester was shown as proud and aloof, but in rare moments, his humanity would break through. His regrets, his loneliness, and his hidden compassion gave audiences glimpses of vulnerability that made him far more complex than the character he replaced. Through all these cast changes, one constant remained, and one woman's transformation would soon reflect MASH's deeper evolution. Loretta Swit. When MASH first aired in 1972, Loretta Swit stepped into the role of Major Margaret Houlihan, a character who at the time was written as a stereotype. Known by the nickname Hot Lips, she was the strict head nurse, a rule follower, and the romantic partner of Major Frank Burns. Early episodes often used her for comic effect, portraying her as rigid and occasionally foolish. But even then, Sweet brought a spark to the role that hinted at greater depth. She was determined not to let Margaret remain a caricature, and her persistence changed the course of the character and the show itself. As the seasons went on, Swit worked closely with the writers to reshape Houlihan. Instead of being just the target of jokes, Margaret began to emerge as a complex, intelligent, and ambitious woman. She displayed skill and authority as head nurse, showing she was more than capable of commanding respect in a camp dominated by men. Sweet once explained that her character was unique because the audience was able to watch her evolve. Margaret began confronting her own vulnerabilities, showing grief, compassion, and moral conflict, while still doing her job under immense pressure. Even her name reflected this transformation. Over time, the scripts shifted from calling her Hot Lips to referring to her as Margaret, signaling her growth into a fully realized character. Sweet faced her own challenges while shaping Houlihan. As one of the few female regulars on the cast, she carried the responsibility of representing women in a show largely centered on male characters. She has spoken openly about how her own life shaped her performance, recalling pressures from childhood and family that made her feel different. Houlihan, in many ways, became a channel for exploring resilience and strength in the face of adversity. Sweet turned what could have been a one-note character into one of the most respected figures in the series. Her commitment did not go unnoticed. Sweet appeared in nearly every episode from the pilot to the finale, becoming one of the show's most consistent and enduring presences. She earned 2 Emmy Awards for her performance in 1980 and 1982. More importantly, she transformed Margaret Houlihan from a punchline into a symbol of professionalism and depth. Through each change, Stevenson, Rogers, Berghoff, Linville, Winchester, and Houlihan, MASH kept evolving and redefining itself. Which of these transformations do you feel left the deepest mark on the show? Share your thoughts in the comments.